right, good afternoon. In a short while, I will be honored to be joined by the President of the Republic of Estonia, Kersti Kaljulaid, thank you, who was just appointed by the Secretary General as a global advocate for every woman, every child. Then at 1:15, I will be joined by the Undersecretaries for Management, Strategy, Policy, and Compliance, Catherine Pollard, and the Undersecretary General for Peace Operations, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, along with Ambassador Matu Joyini, the permanent representative of South Africa to the UN. Mr. Lacroix will join us virtually, and Ms. Pollard and Ambassador Joyini will be here in the room to discuss this morning's virtual high-level meeting on strengthening the conduct of peacekeeping personnel. And speaking of the Security Council's VTC's open debate on children in armed conflict, the Secretary General said that as we mark the 25th anniversary of the mandate's creation, its continued relevance is sadly clear. The disregard for children's rights at times of conflict and upheaval is shocking and heartbreaking, he added. He called on all parties to the conflict to prioritize the prevention of violations against children and to engage in dialogue, ceasefire, and peace processes. Turning to his annual report, the Secretary General reiterated that it is a crucial tool. He called on the Security Council and all member states to strongly support the prevention of children in all ways at all times. And there is no place for children in conflict, he concluded. We must not allow the conflict to trample their rights. And also this morning, he spoke at the second high-level conference on the heads of counterterrorism agencies of member states. He said the fight against terrorism has seen important advances with attacks thwarted across the world, yet the threat has persisted and diversified. The Secretary General noted how Al-Qaeda and ISIL have continued to exploit social grievances and gender stereotypes to inspire lone actors and co-opt other groups. At the same time, he said years of increasing polarization, governance failure, and a normalization of hate speech have benefited terrorist groups. The Secretary General said it is also clear that terrorist groups will exploit hardships and inequalities related to the ongoing pandemic. He stressed the need to build resilience, the need for a human rights reset for counterterrorism, and for counterterrorism to rise to the challenges and opportunities of transformative technologies. His remarks have been shared with you. And speaking via a pre-taped video message, the Secretary General addressed the member states on accountability for misconduct of peacekeepers. He said that the vast majority of peacekeepers live up to the higher standards of conduct, but noted that when they do not, it has a devastating impact on victims and survivors and undermines operational efficiency and our global reputation. He said that the UN steadily has made progress on improving training and creating safe ways to report misconduct, and that we are working to increase transparency, strengthen internal accountability, and emphasize the need for rights and victims of survivors. The Secretary General asked member states to continue supporting initiatives to improve the UN's ability to prevent misconduct, enforce standards, and remedy harm. He also underscored that we need bold action to ensure accountability for UN peacekeeping personnel who are guilty of misconduct. Over the weekend, you saw that the Secretary General issued a statement in which he said he was shocked by the murder of 3 Médecins Sans Frontières humanitarian workers in Tigray in Ethiopia, saying that this is totally unacceptable and appalling violation of international human rights law, and that the perpetrators must be found and severely punished. The Secretary General also strongly condemned the airstrikes on the village of Togota that took place earlier last week. He reiterated the need for all parties to uphold their responsibilities under international humanitarian and human rights law and to ensure the protection of civilians. He called for an independent and swift investigation into the incident. The Secretary General once again calls for an immediate end to the fighting and urgent steps to peacefully resolve the conflict. And I think a number of you asked me about reports of attacks or on humanitarian assets in Mekelle, and I can tell you that we condemn any and all attacks on humanitarian workers and assets and remind again all parties of their obligations under international humanitarian law. all parties must ensure the protection of civilians and that all humanitarian assistance provided by the United Nations is provided according to humanitarian principles. The safety of our staff is a priority, and we are doing everything we can to ensure it. And turning to Gaza, Tor Vennesland, our UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, announced that under the UN framework, the Qatari-funded fuel deliveries for the Gaza power plant are resuming today. This is in accordance with the previous agreement between the UN Office for Project Services and the State of Qatar. Mr. Vennesland welcomed all steps taken to de-escalate the situation. The UN will continue to work with all concerned parties and partners to solidify a ceasefire and help the people of Gaza. And a quick note on the Central African Republic. Our humanitarian coordinator there, Denise Brown, strongly condemned the killing yesterday of a caretaker working with Médecins Sans Frontières who was killed while transferring patients last week in Batangafo in the northwest of the country. The attack is the third attack on Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, in the past month, and the NGO has now suspended its work in the region. This comes, of course, on the same week that our friends at MSF suffered another tragic loss in Ethiopia, as we just said. Our humanitarian colleagues say that the attacks on civilians and aid workers have become widespread in the CAR since late 2020, including killings, looting, attacks on health facilities, forced displacement, and school occupations. OCHA says that in 2020 alone, the Central African Republic was the most dangerous country in the world for humanitarian workers. As of May 31st, 299 incidents, at least one a day, has affected aid workers, with 1 death and 11 injuries. Some 2.8 million people, that's 57% of the population, are in need of humanitarian aid and protection. 727,000 people are currently displaced in the country, a level not seen since 2014. Despite the worsening security environment, aid workers have helped 1.2 million people in the CAR in the first quarter of this year. To date, our humanitarian response plan is only 34% funded. And in a report published today, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, made an urgent call for states to adopt a transformative agenda to uproot systematic racism. The report states that worldwide mobilization of people calling for racial justice has forced a long-delayed reckoning with racism and shifted debates towards a focus on the systemic nature of racism and the institutions that perpetrate it. She called on all states to adopt a whole-of-government and whole-of-society reform and responses, though adequately resourced national and regional action plans, concrete measures developed through national dialogues with meaningful participation, a representation of people of African descent. And from Myanmar, the World Food Programme colleagues there say they're concerned about significant increases in food prices nationwide. For example, the price of cooking oil has jumped some 40% since February. The price increase is especially troubling at a time when 80% of households in Myanmar have lost nearly 50% of their income this year. WFP plans to help up to 1 to 2 million vulnerable people in urban areas. The agency has already reached more than 300,000 vulnerable people in parts of Yangon. And over the weekend, you saw that we issued a statement on Colombia in which the Secretary General condemned the attacks on Friday on the helicopter carrying President of Colombia and other officials. And let's pause here, answer some questions, and then we will go to the President. Take some questions. Celia.
Steph, is there a way for the UN to protect the humanitarian workers? Can something be done?
First of all, if you're referring to the situation in Ethiopia and Tigray, the responsibility to protect humanitarian workers falls squarely, first and foremost, on the government, and also on all parties involved in this conflict. The UN does not have any armed security of any sort to protect humanitarian workers. as we've repeatedly said, attacks on humanitarian workers aren't just attacks on those individuals. Tragic and horrific as it is an attack on the people they are there to serve, and it is unacceptable. Benno, and then we'll go to James.
Thank you, Steph. Today marks that it's 6 months ago that the Secretary General said that Fabrizio Hochschild is under investigation for harassment. I wonder if after 6 months there's anything substantial to say about this case.
No, as far as I understand, the process is still ongoing.
Then I have a follow-up. The internal guidelines say the probable duration should not exceed 3 months. So this is
Which
now
internal guidelines?
OIOS.
For investigations?
For investigations of staff members,
listen,
yeah.
The investigations are done as speedily as possible, but sometimes you have to take, you need to have both speed and thoroughness. And I'm not speaking about this particular case because I'm not involved and have no insight into the investigation, but investigations need to be done in a way that takes into account thoroughness and, of course, speediness for the benefit of everyone involved.
I do understand that, but like double of the duration is quite much, and I talked with the UN staff members who are puzzled about that.
Well, I can't really say anything more than I've just said. I know the investigators are working very thoroughly, as speedily as possible. But when you do an investigation, any investigation, you have to follow follow the facts as you find them. James.
Yeah, I have a number of questions. U.S. airstrikes on targets in Iraq and Syria, the UN's reaction.
And your second question?
Well, you have. I've got more than a second
Okay, all right.
But I can give you another question now, which
Yes.
is Palestine and protests against the Palestinian Authority, large-scale protests. There seems to be all sorts of cases of beatings and arrests of protesters. The UN's reaction to that too.
Okay. We've seen the reports of the airstrikes, the U.S. airstrikes in the Iraqi-Syria border area. The Secretary General remains concerned about the volatile situation in the area, in the region, in fact. He renews his call for all concerned sides to exercise restraint and avoid any risks of escalation which could undermine the ongoing diplomatic efforts at finding a peaceful solution to the region's tensions. On Gaza, we've obviously been following this very closely.
Sorry, the question was more about the West Bank.
The West Bank, sorry, exactly. Sorry, I'm just, it's literally, I need an IFB like an anchor so people can tell me what to say as it comes in. But thank you for pointing me in the right area. We're obviously following very closely, and we've seen, I think we've all seen the images coming out of the West Bank. I think the conduct of the Palestinian security forces is concerning. This obviously follows the death of the former parliamentary candidate Nizar Banat, who died in unclear circumstances, as it were, right now in the custody of Palestinian security forces. We have our human rights colleagues on the ground who witnessed both Palestinian security forces and non-uniformed persons using force against protesters, as well as journalists and human rights officers who were themselves documenting the event. Several people have been injured, as you probably have seen. We call on the Palestinian Authority to ensure that security forces ensure freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, and peaceful assembly, and that any excessive use of force is investigated and prosecuted in accordance with the law. Nabil.
Thanks. So you started with answering with Gaza. So
Yeah.
I'll ask about Gaza. Do you know why the reconstruction process has not kicked off in Gaza after the recent escalation?
Look, obviously, it's a very complex situation where various parties have to manage and be managed. We would like to see reconstruction start as quickly as possible. I think the start of the fuel deliveries that we saw today and are expecting again tomorrow are a positive sign in the sense that ensuring that the Gaza power plant has electricity to function is sort of the backbone, in a sense, of any reconstruction, because you need electricity for everyday living, but you need electricity and power for reconstruction. My understanding is that 8 trucks with fuel went through today. 60 trucks are expected this week. The power plant uses fuel for electricity. The average daily amount of electricity currently generated by the Gaza power plant is about 60 to 70% of the amount generated before the latest conflict. We understand a third turbine was turned on a bit earlier today, at about 1 p.m. local time, with total electricity supplies from the power plant and other sources now returning to about 14 hours a day. And that's up just recently from about 11 to 12 hours a day.
But follow-up, please. I heard here in New York, and now Reuters confirmed the reports quoting an Israeli official that Israel has a condition here that the reconstruction will be eased or facilitated if the Palestinian groups in Gaza release or engage in the releasing of the 4 Israeli, I think 2 soldiers and 2 other Israelis who are still captured in Gaza.
We've seen these press reports. As I said, the reconstruction issue from our end is I mean, from anyone's end, it's a complex one because obviously it's within a political context. We hope that all the parties involved will ensure that reconstruction starts as soon as possible for the benefit of the civilians in Gaza who have already suffered tremendously. Toby.
Thanks, Steph. 2 questions for you today. May we have an update on the work of the special envoy to Myanmar? Where is she and what's she working on?
She is working on Myanmar. That much I know. I believe she is back in Bern. After she was here in New York and she spoke to you, she went to Washington, had a number of meetings with senior State Department officials, I think including Wendy Sherman. And I believe she's back in Bern now.
Are we going to get a readout of the U.S. meeting?
The readout is that she briefed on her work and her discussions that she's been having, and the ones she very much had in the region.
And second question on Afghanistan. I note that the government of Afghanistan is giving a gift to the UN today. Do you see this as a sign of the increasing political fragility in the country and a desire for more international attention?
One doesn't question people when they give you a gift. At least I don't. It's a sign of friendship and a sign of the importance they bring to the United Nations. I'm not going to read anything more into it. Okay, I think Abdelhamid, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a follow-up. In fact, James took my question. My question is, if Mr. Tor Wensland had any contact with the Palestinian Authority, Mr. Abbas, or any of his associates about what happened from the minute that Nizar Banat was assassinated to the
my understanding is that contacts were had with the Palestinian Authority. Okay, James.
Couple more questions, if I can. Does the Secretary General believe in a rules-based international order?
Clearly, the answer is yes. I fear there's a second question coming now.
Well, you know, because in a lengthy article, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has taken aim at that phrase. He says the rules-based order is the embodiment of double standards. Is it a phrase that you're going to continue to use now that one permanent member of the Security Council has written a very lengthy objection to that phrase?
I will leave the analysis of what the foreign minister has said to you. I don't take it in that
So
sense.
the UN will
I
still
think
use that phrase?
I think what is important is that there are rules and there are principles in this organization that 193 members have signed on to, and it is up to those countries that have signed up to observe and those rules and abide by these principles.
Second question is about Pakistan, where there have been protests by women following comments made by the Prime Minister Imran Khan in an interview with Axios. What is the Secretary General's reaction to those comments from the Pakistani Prime Minister? If a woman is wearing very few clothes, it will have an impact on the man unless they are robots. I mean, it's common sense when talking about rape and sexual assault in Pakistan. Does the Secretary General, as a women's rights advocate, think those sort of comments are acceptable?
I had not seen those comments. Is that it is very clear that no one who is the victim of rape should be blamed for the attack, and that's, to me, pretty commonsensical. Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat, and I see an increase in security, which means...
Yes, I have a question.
Sorry. Okay, Joe, go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay.
Go ahead, Joe.
I'll
All right, and then we'll go to
thank
you, Pam.
Thank you.
All right, and then we'll get the president.
This concerns Iran. I believe you were quoted, Stéphane, saying that Secretary General is intent on cooperating with the newly elected Iranian officials and newly elected president out of mutual respect. First of all, I want to know if that is an accurate quote. Secondly, does that mean that the Secretary General is willing to overlook the long record of human rights abuses by the newly elected president of Brazil?
A few things.
No problem with. Let me just finish.
Yes.
And that he also had no problem with the way the so-called election was carried out.
We were not involved in the election at all. Every member state of this organization has a head of state that is reported to us. It is the role of any Secretary General to work with every member state of this organization. That does not mean that the Secretary General will not speak up about human rights violations or any other issues in any country. Pam, and then Pam Falk, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Steph. On Tigray, do you have an overview of how many and from what agencies the UN staff is in Tigray, and what protection or added protection is being issued because of the Doctors Without Borders killings? And then I have a second question.
On Tigray, what I can tell you is that as of June 24th, so a couple of days ago, there were 419 UN staff supporting the humanitarian response in Tigray. The majority of them are national staff, though we have a substantial number of international staff. Most of them are in Mekele, and then there are others in the town of Shire. We assess the security of our staff on a regular basis and adjust our work accordingly. As I mentioned to Celia in the beginning, the responsibility to protect humanitarian staff falls first and foremost in any country on the government, and if we operate in conflict area, on all the parties involved in the conflict. Your other question.
Yes, on the Afghanistan gift, maybe I missed this, but they made the point of saying this is the first gift since the 1960s and that this is the first time a gift that they gave will be displayed. Can you just explain where it will be displayed?
I think it's going to be in the first basement, but I have to check. Yes, I'm told I'm getting a thumbs up for my answer, so there you go.
All right, and nothing to replace Picasso, right?
No, ma'am, not yet. I mean, not that I know
thank
of.
you.
Okay. So with your permission, I will now go get the president, and we'll be right back.